Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So we are in Parshat Mishpatim. Parshat Mishpatim that follows Yitro, the Parsha that deals with the Ten Commandments. Parshat Mishpatim is an extremely rich Parsha with various elements of halacha. Uh, here we are dealing with civil law. In fact, it's a fascinating part where it talks about, property and the way in which we have to treat property, especially in relationship to one another. And so we get into laws of damages and establishing honesty and things like that. And you'll see the situations that the Torah is going to speak about. It talks about specific situations. And of course, we would then derive general principles from these specific situations. A lot of this material is actually dealt with in a section of the Talmud, a major section of the Talmud, uh, the three babas. The word baba in Aramaic means a gate. A bab in Arabic means gate. So there's Baba Kama, which is the first gate. There's Baba Metzia, that's the middle gate, and Baba Batra, which is the last gate. And they all deal essentially with many of the elements that are here in Parshat Mishpatim. If I'm not mistaken, Baba Kama deals with damages, the laws of damages. Again, I mean, seeing that society cannot exist, a society cannot exist unless there are laws that allow people to be treated fairly and in a way that's in a prudent and thoughtful way. So, in some ways, some of the greatest elements of the Torah are to be found in this parsha of Mishpatim. So, here we are. Ki yav ish. If a person grazes a sadeh or kerem, if he is grazing a field or a vineyard, v'shilach et, look at all the Torah Tamima we have to do, et be'iro, he sends his cattle, uvi'er b'sadeh acher, and it grazes in the field of someone else's field. Meitav sadehu umeitav kamo yishalem. He shall pay from the best of his field or in the best of his vineyard. He will have to pay this person for the amount that his cattle grazed. And I think in a sense, the chidush, that is the new idea going on here, is that it's meitav, that even if, let's say, and I think this is what it's suggesting, that even if the nature of that field that the cattle are grazing on, or the nature of that vineyard, is not necessarily the highest quality. What I believe is saying is they have to estimate the value of the amount of damage done. But the point is he has to pay from the best of his own property. He can't substitute inferior quality because there's also the very fact that he did such a thing. Now, these are the sorts of things that Rashi isn't necessarily going to deal with. But when you saw all this tons and tons of Torah Tamima, that's exactly what he goes into these various elements as the rabbis discuss them. It's amazing. Look at this. How much is discussed in terms of pulling this apart and making sure that what's going on is understood. So here we go. So this word yaver is an interesting word. And so Rashi has to talk about it. And he says ki yaver, right? Et be'iro I think let me look and say uvaer. I have to check and see how it is vocalized. Oh dear. Let's see. Yeah, uvaer. It's PL. Uvaer. Just want to make sure. So, in other words, it's actively doing this. So, Rashi tells us that all these examples of this root ba'er have to do kulam lashon behema. They all refer to cattle, the idea of cattle grazing. Kamo anachnu uveirenu. So this he's citing here in I trying to think of whether it's referring to Genesis or Exodus. My gut feeling is it's actually Genesis, but there's a reference is like going down to Egypt, right? And they and their cattle. And there is this word, Be'irenu, in a whole other context where it clearly also means cattle. Right? Does that come with it?
Mine has a footnote and it says
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, wow.
Numbers
Thank
20, verse
Laura.
4.
Well, thank you for sending me right. My memory was not going to serve me, and so thank you, thank you, thank you. And in order not to make this mistake again, if I can, I'm going to try. There it is. Okay, I'm going to put so Numbers 24.
20, verse 4.
Did you say 20? Numbers 20?
Numbers 20, verse 4.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. Wow. Well, there we go. The mind is, as I've been told, is like my mind is like a steel sieve. So thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Ki yav er. So in a case where he grazes, yolich behemotav besadeh v'cherem shel chavero. We're talking about where he took his cattle into the field or the vineyard of his neighbor. V'yazik oto, and he is damaging that field or that vineyard. Excuse me 1 second. Ba'achat, in one of mishtei ele, in 2 ways. He went in and he damaged it in 2 ways. Or beshiluach be'iro, or bevi'ur. And he says what he's saying is either because shalach, right there it says beshilach. So they're saying that essentially 2 ways in which his cattle can damage his neighbor's field, okay? Either in the act of the cattle entering that field or entering that vineyard, or in grazing. Perusho Rabotenu, and our rabbis explain, Perusho Rabotenu, Shiluach, that when it uses this term shalach or shilach, hu niske miderech kaf regel, that there it's talking about damage done by the tread of the hoof. That is simply walking into that field can damage the field. That's one way. Va'er, and the va'er or v'er, who niske hashen. That is referred to as the damage done by the tooth, ha'achilat umaveret, where ha'ochelet, hashen ha'ochelet, the tooth that is consuming and grazing. So there are 2 essential ways in which taking your cattle into somebody else's field, your intention may be to graze. But I think the point that the Torah is making and that the rabbis are inferring is that even if it wasn't your intention to damage the field by the cattle walking onto that field, and your intention maybe was simply to graze, that even the damage that they do by simply walking onto the field is sufficient to require compensation. That any kind of damage, whether willful or accidental, in this case, is going to be subject to payment. So again, we're getting into something very fundamental and I think profound regarding how we treat other people's property, right? Besadeh acher, so Rashi on the besadeh acher, besadeh shel ish acher. The point is, besadeh acher it simply means another field. But he may have more than one field, so he took his cattle from one field to another field. No, besadeh shel ish acher. That the acher here, the other, means someone else, another man, another person. Going on. Here we go. So I'm sorry, I need to go on to the next verse. Here we go. All right. Let me find out. Right. Okay. So what it says is, right, must meitav sadehu, the best of his field, or the best of his vineyard he must pay. Right. We read that. Meitav sadehu yishalem, he should pay from the best of his field. And here's what they do. Shamin et hanezek, they estimate the damage done. Ve'imba leshalem lo karka, right? And if he has to pay through land, if the way he has to pay him back, he doesn't have the cash, and he has to pay land to him, demei nisko, the amount of money of his damage. Yishalom lo mi meitav sadotav. He has to pay him from the best of his lands. He has to give him the best quality land that he has. Im haya nisko sela, right? So, for example, if the amount of damage came to a seller, Yiten lo shave sela, he has to give him the equivalent of a seller, me idit sheyesh lo, from the best land that he has. Because obviously, if it's stony land, he's not going to be able to get many crops from that. And yes, it would probably be a larger area, but the issue here, especially if they're talking about this farming, right? It's the better quality, which is actually a less of an area, is the proper way in which to compensate here. So the Torah is also taking into consideration the nature of the compensation in order to try and act both with justice and equity. And I think the equity is involved in the fact that in the insult given by taking his, and the lack of respect given by his taking his own cattle and taking them into his neighbor's field and either damaging it in these two different ways, that's the element where he is going to have to give the best of his own field if he can't pay him in cash. Limedcha hakatuv. So scripture is teaching you shahanizikin, that when it comes to damages, shamin lahem, they estimate them beidit. The idit is meaning the best quality field he has, and he references Baba Kama, right? Baba Kama is that tractate that deals with damages. So that's in the Torah dealing with that kind of damage. Ki teitze ish. Ki teitze ish. If a fire goes out, umatzah kotzim, and this fire it finds thorns, in other words, something brambles. Rashi will tell us what we mean by kotzim, but assumedly we're talking about something that ignites very easily, right? Going on. Then echal gadish, and consequently it consumes a stack of grain, a heap of grain, or hakama, or standing grain, or hasadeh, or the field, literally is what it means. Shalem yishalem, he shall surely compensate him, he shall pay. Hamavir et haba'era, the person who started the fire, the person who's responsible for the fire, is now held liable for damages that may have taken place. Talking about reality, clearly. Going here. Ki teitze ish. So here's the point. The way in which the Torah is saying is if a fire starts, and it doesn't say if a person starts a fire. And that's significant. And Rashi is saying, afilu me'atzma. Even if, in fact, the fire started without necessarily a person striking the match. even if this fire was caused, let's say, by a lightning strike or something else, right? That the person didn't purposely, intentionally ignite the fire, but it started on this person's property. Umatzah kutzim, and it found thorns, and he explains this is chardon or something in French. And here's the Yiddish word distlin. Look at that. How, the Anglo-Saxon element of English, thistles. You can actually see and hear the word thistles in distlin. The point is, it got something that got it started, right? V'ne'echal gadish, right? And it consumed a stack or heap of grain. Shelichacha b'kotzim, that is that the thorns licked the standing grain. Ad shehigia legadish, until, or at least the fire was igniting in the thistles until it reached a stack or heap of grain, or lekama, or standing grain, hamechuberet lakarka, that was attached to the ground. Right, so it lit and it burned either grain, right? So clearly, this is something that the farmer would have taken and sold, ultimately sold, right? And whether or not it's just standing in a heap, it's not attached to the ground, or whether it's actually attached to the ground. So what does it mean when it says sadeh or hasadeh or the field? By the way, it says hasadeh, right? Shelichacha et niro. So the point here is that it lit up his plowed field. So I'm going to take this out here. And just because I'm comfortable that it actually we're going to know that it's simply talking about the field, right? So in what sense the field? It's not with grain. That's the point. There's no grain growing here, but it burnt the field, a plowed field, v'tzarich lanir ota pam shniya, so that he's going to have to plow it a second time. Shalem Yishalem Hamavir. So the one from whom the fire started will have to pay, will have to compensate. Afopi, despite the fact, shehidlik betoch shelo, right? Even though that the fire started in his own field, right? It started in A's field, vehi atzah me'atzma, and the fire went out independently. He didn't help the fire do it; it just simply went out, right? But he had lit the fire, or the fire had started in his field, al yedei kutzim, right? And it might have started by itself, through those thorns, shematzah, that it found. Chayav l'shalem. He's nevertheless obligated to pay, to compensate. Lefi, why? Shelo shamar et gechalto, that he wasn't watching, he wasn't guarding his own cinders, the cinders that were burning in his field, shelo tetzeh b'tazik, that they shouldn't go out and cause damage. Now, I mean, obviously, there are all kinds of circumstances that can go into play here, but it would appear to me that the main point that the Torah is making here is, even in the previous case that we talked about grazing his cattle, right? It had to do with the fact that he took his cattle out into that other field. And if he intentionally took those cattle into someone else's field, he is going to find there's going to be a high level of compensation. What about if the cattle just went out into that other field and did damage? Well, again, the Torah is not dealing with that, but we can sort of figure it out, because in comparing these cases, we can look and say, well, if he had a broken fence and he didn't fix the fence and the cattle escaped from his field and went to somebody else's field, and did damage, he is going to be responsible because he didn't make sure that his own cattle remained in the field. And despite the fact that he didn't intend to go and have his cattle graze in this other person's field, but in that particular case, again, we would assume, I would infer from that maybe some of the level of compensation that he had to give in that case might be adjusted. okay, because he is not as responsible as he would have been had he intended to take his cattle in and intentionally graze on someone else's field. But here we're being told, even though the fire started in his field, he is still responsible for what's happening in his property. And because we know that cinders tend to, blow off into somebody else's property, he is responsible for trying to take care of that. But then again, I'm thinking of what happened recently in Los Angeles, where there were these 100-mile-an-hour winds, and to what extent can you be responsible? Excuse me. It would seem that the level of responsibility is going to be adjusted in that particular case. So we now get on to a major new section, which has to do a such called Shomrim. So you see, this is now Torah Tamima, where he has a brief introduction, Hakdama Ktsera, the Parshat Shomrim, to the paragraph that deals with someone guarding, right, being responsible for somebody else's property. And the Torah is going to discuss various situations where I give my property to someone else to guard, right? Where I am legitimately, as you might say, asking someone else to take care of my property, or I'm renting someone else's property, or borrowing someone else's property in a way, etc., etc. So there's a bunch that can be said in this particular case. So this is a new situation, but it's all dealing with relationships and how human beings can get along in a fair and just way. Let me make sure. Okay. I don't think we do Shalem Shalem Hamav here. I want to make sure we did that. Ooh. Okay, no, I don't think we did. So let's just go back to this Rashi here. Shalem Yishalem Hamavir, right? The person is this, yes. No, hold on a sec. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in other words, right, Shalom Yishalem. This is talking about the case of the fire. Okay, let me go to this. Right. Afal peshed lit betoch shelo v'hi yatzah me'atzma. We said that. Shematzah chayav. Okay, we did do this. Please forgive me. I was right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's go this. Here we go. Ki yitain, if a person gives, ish el re'ehu, a person to his fellow, kesef, money, or chelim, or vessels, right, utensils, lishmor, to guard, to watch. Vegunav mi beit ha'ish, and this is stolen, right? The money or these utensils are stolen from the house of the man. In other words, the person who's the guardian, right? Im yimatzeh haganav, if the thief is found, yishalem shnayim, then he has to pay double. In other words, presumably we're talking about the thief. Again, for stealing, right? For that sin of stealing. Right. Here we go. Vegunav, and it is stolen, mi beit ha'ish, from the house of the person. Lefi dvarav. That is to say, what this is saying is, this person claims, that is, let's say A gives material, money, or utensils to B to watch for him, to guard for him, right? And they're stolen. And that is, B comes and declares they were stolen. So let's take a look, see if there's anything else here. Right. Okay. Im yimatzeh haganav. If the thief is found, yishalem haganav, the thief will pay shnayim leva'alim, has to pay twice the amount that was stolen, twice the value of the utensils to the owners, to the original owner. Okay. Now remember, this B has come and claimed the stuff was stolen. A asked B to guard the stuff, and please note, he is simply asking him. He's not paying him to do that. That is going to change the circumstance, but he cannot return that material. Okay. Now, imlo imatse haganav. But if they do not find the thief, they cannot, if the thief is not found, is how we would translate it. V'nikrav bal habayit, right? The person, who owns the house. Presumably, we're talking about where the house where these goods are being stored. El ha to the Elohim. And Elohim here means the judges. And here is a classic place where we understand the word Elohim. There are times when when we say Elohim and we are referring to God, but there are times when we use the term Elohim to refer to judges. And again, that's because this word Elohim means our relationship to God, the relationship that we have to God as our judge, right? And our acceptance of the ruling, because we know that judges are at least officially empowered with a great deal of control in the pursuit of justice, right? Im lo shalach yado b'mlechet re'eu is what it's going to be, I believe, right? To make sure, he has to approach the judges to make sure that he did not cast his hand into the property of his neighbor, of his friend. Here it is, im lo oshit yadeh, if he didn't stretch out his hand, b'ma demasar, to what his friend had transferred to him. So simply saying it was stolen, isn't enough if they cannot find the thief. He has a level of responsibility in accepting the fact that he's going to guard this person's property. Let's see. Okay, let's go back to here. See what he says. Right. Right. Lafit varo, according to his word. Okay. Okay, here we go. Im lo yimatse haganav. If the thief is not found, uva hashomer hazeh shehu bal habayit. And this guardian, this watch person, right, is the one who is bal habayit. He is the one who owns the house where the stuff is being stored. V'nikrav, and he should approach El Hadayanim, to the judges, Ladun, to judge, to give a verdict, Imzeh, with this person, Ladun Imzeh, and it could mean to make a judgment regarding this situation, Velishava lo, and to make him swear, Shelo Shalach Yado, I think this Beshelo, that he did not himself steal, in other words, essentially steal this other person's property. So, in other words, it requires an oath on the part of the guardian that he did not steal the property himself. Let's see, here we go. And this is probably a good place for us to stop, and we'll pick this up tomorrow with regards to this with God's help. So I'll stop the share here. Any comments? I mean, yes, Harlan.
Uh,
Yeah.
they cattle going into another person's.
Yeah.
If you didn't know your cattle was going in there, why would it be your fault?
Well, you are supposed to, if you have cattle, you are responsible to make sure they don't damage someone else. If you have a dog and that dog bites someone else, even if you didn't sick the dog on that person, are you responsible? It's your
Yeah.
dog. It's your dog. It's your cattle. And if you are having cattle and you have a farm where your cattle can go out and graze in someone else's field, you're responsible.
Hmm. Okay.
You need to make sure that your cattle are properly penned, and that you have fences that are effective in preventing your cattle from going and grazing in someone else's field.
Yeah, you're right. And about the fire, if
Yeah.
lightning strikes your,
That's what it's saying. Yeah, yeah.
it's your fault. Then, if the lightning strikes your property and it goes on to another person's property, why it should be your fault?
Well, again, if they're cinders, okay, you have to try and make sure you have to do everything you can to prevent the fire from catching in someone else's property. What the
Oh,
Torah is doing here is saying the degree to which we are responsible for one another. To say love your neighbor as yourself is a generalization, but without the specifics as to exactly how you're to love your neighbor as yourself, it doesn't allow for very much. And okay, I'm gonna go on record and saying this. I want to make America great again. I want to make America great again. What do I mean by that? Well, in my opinion, greatness, the greatness of any society has to do essentially with the degree to which those in power are responsible and take care of those who are without power.
oh boy.
That is greatness. And I
But
would
that's
like
why
to
you
see
can't use the
America
word
great.
again.
Say that again.
That's
Y-
why you can't use the word again.
Well, right now it isn't that way.
It has never.
Well, I still would like to think it, okay, that at some point it was. So maybe I'm just a mag.
Well, tell me which point.
Yeah. Well, okay. Back in the 60s, when the civil rights legislation was passed, when the law of was it when slavery was abolished, when the Voting Rights Act was put in place, we see now people attempts being made to prevent people from voting, and there was a Voting Rights Act, and there
But
there were cases whether or not these were actually put into place, to the degree to which they were enforced. But now we're seeing a time as which they're trying to legislate in such a way that they can't be.
yeah,
Sure.
but during the time when those things were happening, then there was de facto attempts to stop registration, which is why the busloads went down there. And there was attempts to replace, there was first replacing slave enslavement with Jim Crow, and then an attempt to extend the um, the aftermath and the results of Jim Crow with just, they had written into the laws, both de facto and de jure, that blacks couldn't like own property and accumulate wealth. They made sure that happened. And we have the effects of that today. So until everybody's taken care of, I don't see that we were ever really great, because not only not everybody's being taken care of, and we have problems with, classism and racism and other isms, but like, we take care of people based on like what groups they're in, and don't take care of people based on their being in other groups. And I just don't see any, I mean, the founding fathers said some nice things, but they were slave owners and they didn't want to give up their slaves. And, it
I
was just
understand. So,
not a great time.
so if I may quibble with you, okay,
Right.
I didn't say I wanted to make America 100% great again. And what I'm saying is, when I want to make America great again, is that I want to take those efforts that were made to, in fact, create greatness in the way I understand greatness and apply them even more. Now, maybe the quibble should be I should say, I want to make America greater again. But then
Well, I
again, it
think
wouldn't
just
work
not
again at
again,
all.
because I don't think full efforts were ever made. I mean, there was that, I'm trying to remember the name of the report in the 60s after the Watts riot. There was a big report about
Mhm.
discrimination and its effects. And it was made public and nothing was done about it. And, they, there was never a solid action backing up words attempt to help out the situations of poverty and discrimination.
I hear you. What I'm saying though is I'm also trying to act in what I hope will be something that will encourage people. In other words, I want to try and use word and verbiage that will try and encourage people. And the fact that there really were some efforts, not sufficient, and there were Americans who were like-minded in terms of trying to take care of the people who are disadvantaged, to make that, I want that to, for people to understand what greatness is and to work towards
Well,
it. We'll never be perfectly great, Lauren,
you
because
can make
there are
you
too many
can make
people.
a certain amount of people happy by saying words like that, but there's a lot of people who are very angry watching other people accumulate wealth and have control and be able to do what they want when they have,
Right,
really nothing that's being nobody's helping them, nobody's caring about them, nobody cares about them till they start shooting everybody, and then it's
right.
like, oh, they're so violent, well, they're frustrated for waiting for hundreds of years for this so-called civil rights movement to affect them.
Right. And I want to work towards that. I want to work towards making it a
Let's
thing.
make America great finally.
Well, I think that that's not going to, unfortunately, encourage too many people. The sadness of that slogan, "Make America Great Again," is how it influences people emotionally. So rationally, of course, I can have no argument with you. But the fact is that we aren't only rational, and I also have to take into account what might be helpful. So am I telling a bold-faced lie? I don't believe I am. All right. And on the other hand, am I trying to say it in a way that's encouraging?
I
Where
think it mostly influences white people one way or the other.
well, if the white people started to act in a great way, then hopefully non-white people would also
That's a huge
benefit.
if. They haven't, and they won't, because they don't want to give up what they have. They're trying to prevent,
I'm
becoming
no arguing with you.
this.
I have no argument at all. Okay. The problem is that how people define greatness is what's at stake here. And in reference to the lesson that we just had, right? We were trying to define and be specific about greatness. That's what makes the Torah great, is its equity and justice. Okay, with that, I am going to stop the recording.